After the Baltimore Ravens re-signed Josh Bynes and Calais Campbell, where are their biggest needs? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And we are back here. It is a Tuesday edition episode, and that means it's time for more Baltimore Ravens talk. The draft less than 3 weeks away. Wow, we've really been going through all this draft content for what doesn't seem like a couple months, but it is a couple months. And sooner rather than later, we're going to know these next rookies that are coming into Baltimore to hopefully make a contribution both during the 2022 season and for many years in the future. But the Ravens made some other headlines over the weekend, obviously re-signing inside linebacker Josh Bynes, defensive lineman Calais Campbell. And today I kind of want to get into what those signings mean for just the majority of the Ravens' needs. So in the first segment, I want to kind of break down each signing a little bit more. We did it yesterday, but I want to get into it a bit more, but also talk about their position. So inside linebacker and defensive line. Does their signing mean they don't have to draft the inside linebacker or defensive lineman or sign one of those players at that position? So that's something we'll get into in the first segment. In the second segment, we'll expand the view a little bit, talking about the other needs on the roster. So whether that is running back, wide receiver, tight end, edge, outside linebacker, cornerback, safety. We'll talk about those needs and just where the Ravens should be focusing now that they have re-signed Josh Bynes and Calais Campbell. And in the final segment, we'll look at more mock drafts from Twitter that we got for our Monday show, but I didn't have enough time to read them out. Again, thank you to everybody who did submit those. So a ton to talk about here today, but also if you are following along with us here in video form, so on YouTube, you can see my face and my background. We put out video content here 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. I'm trying to build the best possible Ravens community that I can over here. We're doing a really good job so far. I really appreciate everybody who has subscribed on YouTube already. If you haven't already, and you are thinking about it, we do put out Daily Ravens content. So if you like that Daily Ravens content, getting a fresh, up-to-date perspective every Monday through Friday, be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn notifications on. Also, in audio form, it's the same exact show. We started off in audio form before moving to video form a couple months ago. And so if you're following along with us in audio form, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, I appreciate you as well. Be sure, if you're following along with us there, to follow the show. Be sure to turn notifications on there as well. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstreicher34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's dive into this content. Calais Campbell, Josh Bynes, both re-signing. We'll start off with Josh Bynes in that inside linebacker position. Now, obviously, the name Bobby Wagner might leave a sour taste in some people's mouths, and the Ravens did have to pivot away from Wagner once he signed with the Los Angeles Rams. But the Ravens go to Josh Bynes for his fourth stint with the Ravens, Mr. Reliable over here in Josh Bynes. And I was kind of thinking about it. And during Bynes' second and third stint, so the one he had in 2019 and then the one that he had in 2021, both of those times he was brought in the middle of the year, or at least before or after the regular season started, brought up to the 53-man and performed really well and kind of was a stabling force. In 2019, obviously he and LJ Fort came in together for a linebacker group that was struggling with Patrick Owasso and Kenny Young. And he and LJ Fort stabilized that unit, stabilized that defense, and the rest of that season is history. They won 12 straight games en route to that 14-2 season. 2021, Bynes is signed to the practice squad after he's cut from Carolina after the preseason, gets brought up permanently to the active roster a couple weeks after that, and gets the starting job. I think it was week 6, right? Week 6 against the Chargers. And after that, we see Patrick Queen kind of settle down. The defense get a little better at tackling. So he is that stabilizing force. And the fact that Bynes is back in Baltimore, I think is a good thing, because you want to have somebody who isn't going to, one, break the bank, two, can be that veteran presence for players like Queen and Malik Harrison, etc. But three, he knows the system. He knows the organization. The organization likes him. He likes the organization. There are no questions about, hey, what's the fit going to be here? They know it already. And that's not to say that they can't go out there and get another guy who hasn't been in the organization who would maybe be a little bit younger or a little bit more athletic or whatnot. But Bynes is a willing tackler, good in the run game, can give you some pass coverage snaps here and there as well. I like the overall signing here. What it means for the position of inside linebacker, I don't think it means they can't draft a guy. This is a very deep inside linebacker class, especially when you start getting into the late second, early third, mid third rounds. Leo Chanel, Troy Anderson, those are the types of players where I think that they could get value. And it depends on I feel like it depends on what this whole thing with Malik Harrison is going to be, because Harrison could be this hybrid inside linebacker, Sam linebacker. It seems like the Ravens have already been going that route a little bit during some of the seasons, but now that John Harbaugh has said, he's going to be cross-training at Sam linebacker, if the Ravens want to have another option at inside linebacker, because if Harrison doesn't end up working out at inside linebacker and is a better edge rusher, is a Sam guy, that could be his role, and that's completely okay. You can play some inside linebacker too, but for a player like, let's say Troy Anderson, who is probably the most versatile player in this entire draft class, and plays offense, defense, whatever you want, I think it could be a worthwhile investment. I think the signing of Bynes lessens the need for an inside linebacker, but it does not completely eliminate that need. And I think that it would still be within Baltimore's best interest probably to go out there and draft a maybe fourth linebacker if they don't bring back LJ Fort potentially, or a fifth linebacker there as well. Someone who can play special teams, can give you some good snaps in the event of an injury. You can never have too much depth. The Ravens have found that out, and we've all found that out as well. So I think that, the signing of Bynes is a good signing that lessens the need for inside linebacker, but I think that they should still probably look to invest in the position, maybe just one more time in a decently sized way. And then moving on to Calais Campbell, a defensive lineman, signing a 2-year, $12.5 million contract worth up to around $16 million total. And the first-year cap hit, according to Jess Rubick of The Athletic, is around $3.56 million. So I think that this is a very solid signing, and as I kind of talked about yesterday, if you haven't checked out that show, I highly recommend it. We do a 7-round mock draft over there, but I kind of talked about in that first segment how the role that Calais Campbell was used in 2021 was, I don't think, the role that many wanted him to play in 2021. And I'm not saying he wasn't effective when he was on the field, because he was, but for Campbell, with his age, you want to keep him fresh, right? You want to keep him, I think, when looking at what he could do later in the year on less snaps compared to playing 80% of snaps early and then being worn out at the end of the year, you want to have him fresh for the end of the year, for the playoffs. What Ravens hoped that they would get to last year. They didn't. But Campbell played by far the most amount of snaps on the defensive line in 2021. And again, as I said in the offseason, I didn't want that to be the case for Campbell, because keeping him fresh was, I think, much better for them. So in 2022, where does their defensive line depth stand? Well, right now, Derek Wolfe, I think Derek Wolfe's kind of forgotten in my opinion. Derek Wolfe in 2020 was one of the best run stuffers in all of football. So if he is able to come back, if he is able to have that same impact, that is a very underrated player who I think can make a huge, huge statement on a 2022 season for this Baltimore defensive line. Justin Madubuike, can he take that next step? Broderick Washington, can he take that next step? Michael Pierce is signed. So they have the pieces there. But again, that does not deter me, if I'm the Ravens, from investing in the position in the draft. I think free agency-wise, they're probably done. I think Michael Pierce was that outside addition for them. Calais Campbell was either the one of Brandon Williams or Calais Campbell to come back. So I'm pretty sure Brandon Williams probably won't be back. Anything can happen, obviously, but it just seems like that's probably what's going to end up happening. But in the draft, you have some nice early talent like Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, Travis Jones. You have really quality pieces. In the later rounds, the talent kind of falls off a little bit. You have to kind of look for some solid options. Matthew Butler, we've talked about before, but I think if you can invest in that position, maybe late day 2, early day 3. If they took Jordan Davis in the first round and they thought that, hey, look, Jordan Davis is going to be an unstoppable force on our defensive line for 10 years, if that's what their thought process is, then you know what? I'm content with the pick. Would it be my favorite pick in the world because of the re-signings of Pierce and Campbell? Probably not, but is Calais Campbell a 10-year option? Is Michael Pierce a 10-year option? Derek Wolfe, is he a 10-year option? No. I mean, those guys are all probably going to be gone within the next 1 to 4 seasons, most likely, whether they go to another team or just flat out retire. Michael Pierce, I think, has made it clear that this could be his last contract in the NFL with Baltimore. So you have to look at it that way and say the Ravens have always built, of course, for the present, but also for the future, taking best player available in positions of need that aren't necessarily needs then, but maybe will be in a few years, a la Marlon Humphrey at cornerback, a la J.K. Dobbins at running back, for recent examples. So I do think that, maybe spending that 14th pick on an offensive lineman for right now, in the present, that's not the biggest need on this team. But if they feel like Jordan Davis is that guy, I'm not going to argue with him. I feel like that's an okay pick in my opinion. But if you can get a Wyatt, if you trade back, or if you can get a Travis Jones or Matthew Butler in the fourth, etc., those are also solid picks. I'd expect the Ravens to take a defensive lineman in this draft, something they did not do in the 2021 draft. So I'm excited to see how they address both inside linebacker and interior defensive line. But we're not done talking about the needs here for the Ravens here on Locked On Ravens. In our second segment, we're going to be diving into the rest of the Ravens' needs, so be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about. But first, let me tell you a bit about BetOnline. And yes, March Madness, it's done. It's over with. Kansas is the champion. I usually pick them. I decided to go against that this year and didn't work out too well for me, obviously. But now we're in NBA playoff mode. MLB in full swing. The Orioles get their first win yesterday on the home opener day for the Orioles. They roll out the orange carpet and everything. So great win for the Baltimore Orioles. And in the NBA playoffs, the Denver Nuggets going up against the Golden State Warriors, that 3-6 matchup. So if you want to bet on that matchup or any other NBA playoff game, BetOnline is the place for you. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and where you can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, especially for the playoffs, for basketball, and the start of the Major League Baseball season. So if you want to learn more, head to the website, use your mobile device to learn more about those trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on Tuesday. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still hanging out with you here. Now, we're going to be diving into the Ravens' other needs outside of inside linebacker and defensive line. And this is something we'll be talking about leading up to the draft, right? Ravens' needs before the draft, offensive needs, defensive needs, etc. But for now, I just want to do a pretty wide overview of how the Campbell and Bynes signings kind of impact where the Ravens could be looking and what needs shoot up, what needs go down. And obviously with Campbell and Bynes being signed, inside linebacker and defensive line, they move down on the list a little bit, not off the list. We did talk about that, but I do think they are needs that they could maybe sign a guy at, draft a guy at, and you're kind of thinking, all right, this room is pretty deep. This room has some talent, but there are other positions on the defense in particular, and also on the offense as well, that do need some major addressing by the team in the coming weeks, the coming months after the draft too. And I think the big two that everybody are talking about right now, it's cornerback and it's edge. I mean, those are the two needs where you look at the roster, you look at who's available on the free agent market, who's going to be up for grabs in the draft, and you look at what the Ravens have, and you think, wow, there could be probably 2 or 3 guys here where the Ravens could get quality pieces, star talent potential, etc. If I had to rank 1, 2, cornerback, edge, I actually think it's a pretty difficult thing to rank, but in my opinion, I think edge comes number 1, corner comes number 2, but they are very close. My reasoning for that is the Ravens have star power at cornerback. Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, both guys coming off a season-ending injury, so you kind of have to be a bit cautious about, all right, what are the expectations for these guys? Can they bounce back? I'm knocking on wood. I'm hoping they can. But with those serious injuries, and Marlon Humphrey's injury is one that it's kind of like, all right, he can fully recover from that. That's okay. It feels like that injury has a pretty good recovery rate overall, and he's back to playing. A torn pec, it's a serious injury, but it's not like the torn ACL that Marcus Peters suffered in terms of the track record of NFL players coming back from it, which is not as positive as a torn pec muscle. So Marcus Peters with his injury, that's going to be one to monitor for sure, but they have that star power there regardless. At the edge position, they have some power there. Adafe Owe, Tyus Bowser, Dalen Hayes, but the issue is that Tyus Bowser tore his Achilles in week 17, and he won't be ready to play during week 1 of the 2022 season. Dalen Hayes was injured for most of the year in 2021 during his rookie season, and Owe is apparently coming off a shoulder surgery after missing the last 2 games of the season with a foot injury. So they have been banged up there. They don't have a ton of star power at the beginning. I think Owe can develop and blossom into that star, and Tyus Bowser has shown he is one of the more solid players in this league at that position, can do it all. But I think you have to have more there, and I think when looking at kind of what's left, what's available, free agency-wise, draft-wise, this is where the Zadarius Smith thing kind of comes in, and you're like, oh, why couldn't it just happen? Like, Smith would have provided that star power, would have been the number 1 edge rusher on this team, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So we're moving on. And I think this draft class, you could see 4 edge rushers go in the top 10. Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, who we talked about yesterday. You have Trayvon Walker and Jermaine Johnson at the second. Now, Jermaine Johnson is probably the most likely out of those 4 to fall out of the top 10, depending. Maybe there are 2 quarterbacks taken in the top 10, or 3 corners taken in the top 10, or maybe a surprise wide receiver makes it in there. Who knows? But I think for me, if Kayvon Thibodeau falls, like we talked about yesterday, to around the 7 to 9 range, I'm personally making that trade up. If Jermaine Johnson falls out of the top 10, I might be making that trade up too. I might not risk the fact that he might not fall to 14. If that's the player the Ravens really want, and look, he is a very solid player, I might make that trade up a couple picks, maybe surrender a third or a fourth or something like that. So edge to me is the first need. Corner is the second need. They just need depth at corner. I mean, Tavon Young leaving, Anthony Averett leaving, Chris Westry leaving, Jimmy Smith still being on the free agent market. They just don't have a lot of guys there. There are the hybrid wild card options such as Brandon Stevens or Darius Washington. But for now, I think they do. The thing that we talked about a couple weeks ago was they either sign 2 guys, draft 1, draft 2 guys, sign 1. So that's where I'm kind of looking in those situations. Other needs that are more sneaky are the tight end position, the running back position. 2 on the offensive side of the ball there. But before we talk about those, I do want to talk about the offensive line a little bit because they do need to invest in the offensive line. I think for me personally, 2 offensive linemen is the absolute sweet spot for me. I think 1 is a little too little and 3 is a little too many. I think if the Ravens can get out of this draft with a tackle, a surefire tackle option that can be a backup, can slot in the case of Ronnie Stanley's recovery not going as planned, I think that's one area they absolutely have to draft. And then another one is a center type player. So whether that is a versatile piece who can play center or a pure center, I think they should invest in those 2 positions. They're pretty set at guard, honestly. I mean, at the time of this recording, they have Ben Cleveland, Ben Powers, Tyree Phillips, who I view as a guard, Kevin Zeitler, obviously, who was put in at that right guard position. So they're set there. I think they shouldn't have to invest in a pure guard this time around. But if they have a center that can kick out to guard, I think that's okay because it seems like right now Patrick McCary is going to be the guy for them at the center position. So if it's McCary, Cologne, and then another guy who has the versatility to play, whether it's all 5 positions like McCary or center and guard, etc., I think that's where they should look there. So whether it is a Rasheed Walker, Cole Strange combination or a Daniel Falele and Luke Fortner situation, I think 2 offensive linemen for me is what they should do in the draft. I think free agency wise, they're probably done. And John Harbaugh pretty much made that clear when he said that they have confidence in McCary and everything, and kind of made the whole thing about how they're probably not going to look to the free agent market for a center. They just haven't invested in that position from a free agency perspective for a very long time. So that's not a shock. I'm still on this JC Treader train, but it seems like that is long since stopped and we're kind of off of it and moving on to the draft for those center prospects. So offensive line is key. They do need tackle depth. It shocked me when they didn't take a tackle in last year's draft. I think it shocked a lot of people. And so now they have the opportunity in a decently deep tackle class. I think the first 3-4 rounds have a lot of solid options who could be developmental pieces who could step in a pinch. That's something that the Ravens need. And I think that's something that they will get overall. Then obviously the center as well. But going back to running back, going back to tight end, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, it was made clear that, the recoveries that they don't know. The Ravens don't know. They're confident in those guys coming back, but is with all major injuries, and as we talked about with Marcus Peters, you just never know with how these recoveries could go. And there has been obviously the rumblings of, hey, these guys can maybe start on the PUP list. So I think at this point in time, investing a 4th round pick in a running back is definitely not out of the realm of possibility. 3rd round, I think, might be a little too early because when you look at this running back class, you have enough talent there that you can have a guy fall into the 4th round and not necessarily invest that 3rd round. So you can take a position more of a need in the 3rd round than get the running back in the 4th round. But there was a wrench thrown into all of this over the weekend with Melvin Gordon, and the Ravens reportedly working on a deal with Melvin Gordon, according to Ian Rappaport of NFL Network. And we'll talk about Gordon throughout the rest of the week here, obviously, as well. So be sure to stay tuned for all that. But I feel like for Melvin Gordon, he is a player that is obviously one of the best on the free agent market at his position. But how much is the need for a free agent veteran running back who is probably not going to command the veteran minimum? Gordon is going to deserve a contract much larger than the veteran minimum. I'm not saying it would necessarily break the bank, but I know there has been the rumblings on Twitter that like, hey, what I would take for Melvin Gordon is 2 for 5 or something like that. And yeah, I mean, 2 for 5 sounds great for a player like Melvin Gordon. Gives the Ravens one of the better backfields in the NFL if they didn't have it already. I mean, they do. But it feels like to me, investing money in the running back position, and let me rephrase that, investing a large amount of money in the running back position where it is right now, I would just rather, instead of kind of forking over $4 million per season to a running back that could be spent on a corner or an edge guy, I would rather spend the money on a corner or an edge guy and then draft a running back in the 4th round who, it has shiftiness, ability, this, that, and the other. Gordon has fumbling issues. I'm not saying Melvin Gordon wouldn't be good in the Ravens offense. He would be good in this Ravens offense. But I just think that for what the Ravens have right now, I'd prefer assigning somewhere else. But that's not saying I wouldn't mind Gordon on the Ravens. Gordon, actually, in that draft, when he was drafted, it was him and Todd Gurley. I wanted nothing more than Melvin Gordon on the Ravens in that draft. He was my favorite running back coming out of Wisconsin there. And I wanted Melvin Gordon on the Ravens so badly. So if it happens this time, it was just a little delayed, and the younger Ravens fan in me will be very happy about it. But again, I think corner and edge are just bigger needs right now. So if you can sign a Melvin Ingram, for example, for $4 million a season, or Melvin Gordon for $4 million a season, I'm taking the first Melvin there and Melvin Ingram personally. But there are quality running back options in this draft: Dameon Pierce, Kyron Williams, Jerome Ford, Ty Chandler, some of the mid to late round guys, and obviously the top of the class. Isaiah Spiller is one of those guys, and Kenneth Walker, et cetera, et cetera. So you look at that, and Breece Hall is someone at Iowa State who's probably the consensus top guy, but the top 3 there seem to be kind of rotating around a lot. So running back, there's that. Tight end, they've been looking for a third tight end ever since Hayden Hurst left, and they've missed that hybrid guy who can also play some H-back potentially if you want them to have that aspect to their game. But Hurst could block, he could pass catch, he could do a lot. So there are options. I don't think of veteran options on the table. I think this is more of a draft type thing. I know Chiga Conko out of Maryland has gotten some praise from Lamar Jackson, so that's been a popular option for a lot of people. But for me, I don't know. I feel like there are options in this draft class, especially in the later rounds. They don't have to invest a 3rd round pick in a Jeremy Ruckert if they don't want to. They have other options there if they want to fill other needs and move on and get a 4th round tight end, 5th round tight end, 6th round tight end. They could do it that way. So tight end's another need there. Needs that I don't think need addressing, at least in the draft. Safety, I think the Ravens are pretty set. Maybe they take a late round guy, but I feel like they might just look to undrafted free agency there. They signed Marcus Williams, brought back Tony Jefferson. Geno Stone is also back. They have Chuck Clark and just a lot of depth there overall. So maybe a late round guy, but unless it's like a Kyle Hamilton type talent falling, I wouldn't expect the Ravens to get a safety. But again, they've done crazier things. And also quarterback, maybe same thing. Maybe it's like a late round guy who can compete for the 3rd round job, but the 3rd quarterback job, but they don't need a quarterback. They don't even need a backup quarterback, right? They need a 3rd string guy. So if they really like somebody, right? If they like somebody and they say, hey, this guy would really, really fit our system, fit our scheme, we're not going to risk him getting an undrafted free agency, then sure, the last pick of their draft, yeah, that's fine. But spending a mid-round pick, no. Even a mid to late round pick, no. I'm probably thinking 6th, 7th round for the quarterback, in my opinion there. So tons of needs-based questions for the Ravens, and we'll dive into those throughout the rest of the week, of course. We'll head into our final break now on Locked On Ravens. When we get back, we'll be diving into some mock drafts from Twitter, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But first, let me tell you a bit about Rock Auto. And there are so many increasing numbers of makes and models nowadays. And since this episode is being brought to you by Rock Auto, I will tell you a bit about Rock Auto and just why you need to get in with Rock Auto. So there are a lot of intimidating questions that you can sometimes go into a shop and you have to ask these questions, and the person behind the counter, they order the parts in their computer, and sometimes they can only choose the brands of the parts that the warehouse happens to carry. But don't fret anymore, because you have computers with access to rockauto.com, both at home and in your pocket. And for me, it's really important that I can save time and money when shopping for my car. So you can save a ton of time and money when using Rock Auto. Plus, as a family business, so they are very in tune with serving do-it-yourselfers. They've been doing it actually for over 20 years. And the prices reliably low for every customer. And of course, you can get anything you need, such as brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. The carpet, very underrated aspect of a car, in my opinion. So be sure to go to rockauto.com right now. Use the parts and see all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked On. They had you hear about us back, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. Let's dive into some of these mock drafts on Twitter now. We got a ton of them. Again, thank you. I'm going to read them as I see them. So as I scroll down here, the ones I see and I haven't read out, those are going to be the ones that I read now. And so let's start with a mock draft from B. Ward, who says reinforcements for the trenches, who has the Ravens trading pick 14 and 141 for 21, 54, 85, and a round 4 in 2023. And the Ravens at 21 take Jermaine Johnson, edge from Florida State. Then at 45, Kyler Gordon, corner from Washington. Then another trade. The Ravens trade 54 for 62 and 94 at 62. Daniel Falele, Minnesota tackle, is the pick. 76, John Pascal, edge from Kentucky, is a selection. Corner Marcus Jones from Houston's the pick at 85. JoJo Doman, linebacker from Nebraska's at 94. Damian Pierce, running back from Florida, is 100. Luke Fortner, center from Kentucky, is at 110. Neil Farrell Jr., LSU defensive lineman, is at 119. Noah Ellis, defensive lineman from Idaho, is at 128. And James Mitchell, the tight end from Virginia Tech, is at 196. And then there's another trade. The Ravens traded their fourth round selection, 139, for a fifth in 2023, sixth in 2023, sixth in 2023, and 7 in 2023. So a lot of draft capital coming here from B. Ward. Getting Jermaine Johnson at 21 is it. I said he might not be there at 14. Him being there at 21, I've said it before, I'd be doing backflips if that were the case. Then pairing him with Kyler Gordon, we talked about it in the second segment. What are the Ravens' two biggest needs? Edge and cornerback. They need playmakers, some solid depth. They get playmakers and solid depth with those two picks for sure. And then on top of it, adding Daniel Falele, the tackle from Minnesota, at 62. That's a really good class. Doubling down then at both edge and corner with the next two picks there at 76 and 85. And then the rest of the needs start to fill out. And this is kind of what I was talking about, right? Getting two defensive linemen in the mid-round so they don't have to overinvest. Getting a linebacker in the third round, don't have to overinvest in that position. Now, overinvestment is good. Don't get me wrong. Like, injury-wise, you never know. You want to have the best talent possible, but you also have to fill the needs. So it's a balancing act. These drafts are all balancing acts, and I think that B. Ward does a very good job of balancing, taking needs, taking best player available. I really like this draft. Damian Pierce, Luke Fortner, two guys where I like a lot as well. So good job here from B. Ward. I really like this one. Next, we're going to dive in to a mock draft from Brandon Hughes, who says definitely hoping for a trade up as well. And he has the Ravens trading 14 and 45 for 858 and 114. At 80 has the Ravens taking Ahmed Gardner, corner out of Cincinnati. 58, Abraham Lucas, tackle from Washington State. Jalen Tolbert, South Alabama wide receiver, 76. Luke Fortner, Kentucky center, at 100. Ryan Robinson Jr., Alabama running back, at 110. Matthew Butler, defensive lineman from Tennessee, at 114. Tariq Castro Fields, Penn State corner, 119. Tyreek Smith, Ohio State edge, at 128. DeMarco Jackson, Appalachian State linebacker, 139. Marquise Bell, Florida A&M safety, 141. And Chika Okonkwo, Maryland tight end, at 196. Yeah, Sauce Gardner would fill an immediate need for this Ravens team. And I've talked about before how the Ravens, they like their three cornerback rotations, such as what they have with Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Carr, Jimmy Smith, or Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith, etc. If you have a rotation of Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, and Sauce Gardner, that gives you one of the more deadly cornerback rooms in the entire NFL. And that is exactly what the Ravens want. They invest a ton of money in their secondary. We have seen that with Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters, and now the contract to Marcus Williams, etc. And I think for Gardner, if the Ravens just say, you know what, we want to build the best secondary in this league, going Sauce Gardner would be a way to do that. Then at 58, getting solid tackle depth from Abraham Lucas, who is now kind of, I feel like, snuck his way into the second round a little bit. He was kind of more of that third round, end of the third round guy. He's now firmly in the second round, or towards the end of the second round, in my opinion there. Getting a wide receiver at 76, don't hate that. Don't hate that at all. Then you have center, running back, defensive line, another corner, and then the edge comes at 128. So maybe what I'd do here is, instead of the wide receiver at 76, I would move the edge guy up to 76 and then the wide receiver to 128. But again, this all depends how the board falls, right? I don't know how this board fell, but just from a needs-based perspective, I'm just trying to add different perspectives to it. Maybe the edge comes first because of the need for depth there, or maybe in this situation, the Ravens sign Jadavian Clowney or something, and then the edge need goes down on the list a little bit. So that's really interesting, but I do like the rest of this draft. Fills out solid depth. You hit on all the needs here. Good mock draft from Brandon Hughes, one that I think the Ravens, they could use some of these strategies for sure and kind of look at what ends up happening here. Next, we'll look at a mock draft from Sammy AIAK or A1AK, who says, hi, loyal Ravens fan since 96, all the way from Canada. I listen to the podcast every day on my way to work. Y'all are doing an amazing job. Keep it up. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for those kind words. And so Sammy here has the Ravens trading 14 for 29 and 30. Very popular trade combination, by the way. I've seen this a lot. The Ravens at 29 take David Ojabo, Michigan edge, and then at 30 take Daxton Hill, Michigan defensive back. 45 Leo Chanel, linebacker from Wisconsin. Justin Ross, wide receiver from Clemson at 76. I'm laughing because I love Justin Ross. Luke Fortner, Kentucky center at 100. Rasheed Walker, tackle from Penn State at 110. Matthew Butler, defensive lineman from Tennessee at 119. Tyreek Smith, edge from Ohio State at 128. Zach Tom, tackle, Wake Forest at 139. Cordell Flott, LSU corner at 141, and Chickaconquo, Maryland tight end at 196. And so the Ojabo Hill combination, obviously Mike McDonald coming over from Michigan, being the Ravens' new defensive coordinator. That is probably a big reason why the Ravens would do something like this. Now, Ojabo, the injury situation, obviously very unfortunate. I am very content taking David Ojabo at the end of the first round from the Ravens. Absolutely. I think that if they get a package like this for 14, where they can also take another impact playmaker, because that's my thing. An impact playmaker with David Ojabo at 30, let's say, or wherever, that was my key thing. I don't think that David Ojabo should be the only Ravens first-round pick, in my opinion, right? If they can get another playmaker, that is where I would go there. So Daxton Hill, certainly a playmaker. Then Tyreek Smith, the other edge guy, at 128. Maybe I'd move that up a little bit depending on how the board falls, but you never know there. Justin Ross, love the catchability from him. Leo Chanel, linebacker, who I think is one of the better ones in this class. Pretty underrated in my opinion. We've talked about Rasheed Walker, Matthew Butler, etc. Chickaconquo, obviously. So I like this mock draft a lot here, especially because you can have somebody who can come back, top 15 value in Ojabo, who, if he didn't get injured, he'd be going in that range. So I think that's the value there, and you also get the playmakers. So good mock draft here from Sammy. And then finally, we'll look at a mock draft from Jesse Balausis, who has the Ravens taking Jordan Davis, defensive lineman at number 14. And then Nakobe Dean, linebacker from Georgia at 45. So two Georgia guys back-to-back. Najee Sanders, edge from Cincinnati at 76. Max Mitchell, offensive tackle, Louisiana Lafayette, 100. Jelani Woods, tight end, Virginia, 110. Cam Jurgens, interior offensive lineman or center from Nebraska, 119. Mario Goodrich, corner from Clemson at 128. Isaiah Thomas, edge from Oklahoma at 139. Chris Paul, offensive lineman from Tulsa at 141, and Isaiah Weston, wide receiver, Northern Iowa at 196. This is what I was talking about in the second segment. If Jordan Davis was the pick at 14, I wouldn't hate it. You know, I have done a mock draft where Jordan Davis was the pick at 14. I think that he would slot, he would make this defensive line group very, very dominant with Campbell and Pierce and Wolf and Davis himself. I think that would be a great investment. And then you have Dean, who, again, linebacker. So it's kind of like what we were talking about, where the Ravens don't have to overinvest, but if they feel like the player there would be just like phenomenal, I think that would be a fine investment in my opinion, especially if you can get the value on a Dean at 45, who probably won't be there at 45, but you take what the mock draft simulator gets you. Cornerback at 128 with what the Ravens have right now, maybe this is the sign to draft one approach where, you know, corner's the first guy taken here at 128. So I think that would be one where maybe the Ravens go after a slot guy in free agency and then another solid outside corner like a Joe Hayden, Stephon Gilmore, one of the top guys on the market. And then they get a Goodrich who can develop, etc. But I like the investment in the offensive tackle position, then the double down on edge at 76 and 139 here. You get two offensive linemen. That is my sweet spot for offensive linemen. Oh, no, wait, there are three. I'm a three. So maybe one too many, but I wouldn't hate it. You know, 1 to 3 I'm content with. 2 is my sweet spot. So that's where I'll say about that. And then the investment in the wide receiver at the end of this draft. So solid mock draft here from Jesse for sure. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me get back to tomorrow. We'll be answering your mailbag questions and much more. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you tomorrow.